All right, let's dive into this.
Okay,
We're going deep on Indian politics today.
that's good.
Yeah, and we're looking at this article from Samvada World called The Political Reality of India. It was published on May 12th of this year.
Hmm.
Some really some really interesting stuff here.
Yeah.
Just from the subtitles, it looks like we'll be covering freebies, how those affect the economy, parties that are run like family businesses, and then the whole issue of appeasement.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so luckily I've got an expert in political systems here with me to help us unpack all of this, especially as it relates to India.
Happy to help.
Great. So the article starts off talking about this balance that India tries to strike between a capitalist model, which they have, but also, providing welfare programs for a huge population.
Yeah, it's a tough.
It seems like a real tightrope walk.
Yeah, it is. It's really a legacy of their socialist leanings after becoming independent.
Oh,
Yeah, the goal was to,
yeah.
make a more equitable society and all that.
Yeah,
Uplift the masses, provide for basic needs. But it led to a ton of bureaucracy.
yeah.
Just overall slow economic growth. And eventually, almost a financial crisis in the 90s.
Right. The article mentions that that's when the shift to economic liberalization started.
Exactly. The 90s saw a lot of reforms that opened up the markets, loosened up government control,
And then, well,
which then, of course, led to pretty good economic growth.
okay.
But then the question always remains, how much welfare is enough? How much becomes unsustainable?
Yeah,
And the article uses this example of free Reich rations,
right.
which is a lifeline for a lot of people,
Hmm.
but it makes you wonder, where do you draw the line?
It's even trickier, too, when you think about elections.
Oh, for sure.
The article mentions that politicians suddenly become very generous with their promises, and that impacts state budgets in a big way.
Yes.
Sometimes with consequences that go way past the election season.
Uh-huh.
It's a tough question, but I'm curious, how do you think they can manage this? The welfare programs, the economy.
It's a tough one. It's a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
And it's something that's faced by democracies all over the world, not just India.
Right.
But what makes it so fascinating in India is the scale of it all and the huge diversity they have to try to find solutions for.
For sure. Okay, let's change gears a bit and talk about family-run political parties.
Right.
The article makes a bold statement saying that almost all parties in India now function like family-run corporations.
Oh, wow.
Is that what you're seeing too?
Well, it's definitely a big thing over there. And while having multiple family members in politics isn't necessarily bad in itself, it does become a problem when parties essentially become like hereditary.
Ah, yeah.
Because then you get a system where loyalty to the family is more important than anything else, and it just shuts out new talent.
Then fresh ideas, I mean.
And fresh ideas, exactly.
The article uses a good example of this with the Himachal Pradesh assembly elections,
Yep.
where members of a family who were denied tickets ended up running independently.
Yes.
And it hurt the BJP's chances.
It did.
So that really shows how deep this family loyalty goes, both within the parties and with the voters, too.
Yeah, and it creates these dynasties, that are sometimes very powerful.
It's amazing.
The article mentions Lalu Prasad Yadav. He was convicted in a big corruption case,
Yeah.
but his family still enjoys a lot of political support.
It really makes you wonder why voters keep supporting these families. Is it just name recognition, or is it like loyalty that's been built over generations, or maybe there just aren't any good alternatives?
Right.
And what about the people trying to enter politics outside these family structures? How tough is it for them?
Yeah, it is hard for them. It shows you the power of those who are already in power.
And the difficulty of changing that?
Yes, exactly. When power is inherited and not earned.
Okay, so now let's move on to this idea of political appeasement,
Okay.
particularly how it relates to India's Muslim population.
Right.
The article goes pretty deep on this, and it's obviously a sensitive issue, so we want to be nuanced here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's crucial to keep the historical context in mind.
Yeah, talk about that.
Okay, so the partition in 1947 of India and Pakistan, which was largely based on religion, that left deep scars on the national psyche.
Of course.
Yeah. And after that, there were big concerns about whether Muslim citizens would be loyal to this newly formed India.
Right.
And that anxiety still has an impact on their politics today.
Yeah. The article mentions the Khilafat movement,
Yeah.
which was when Indian Muslims campaigned for the Ottoman Caliphate in Turkey.
Right.
And that sparked a lot of debate about, internal versus external loyalties. Like,
Right.
where did their allegiance really lie
Right.
with India or with a foreign religious leader?
It's complicated.
It is complicated, yeah. It shows you how complex identity and belonging can be.
It really does. And it tapped into that existing anxiety.
Yeah.
It fueled this idea that appeasement was needed.
Yeah. To keep the peace, essentially.
Right, to ensure that the Muslim community would be integrated into India.
And how does all of that historical baggage play into what we're seeing today in their politics?
Well, it's tricky.
Yeah.
On the one hand, they've made big progress,
Mhm.
protecting minority rights, trying to be inclusive.
Right.
But, there are worries that sometimes appeasement has meant ignoring the needs of other groups.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the article brings up this example of the Mopla massacre,
Right.
which was this awful event where a lot of Hindu landlords were killed.
By Mopla Muslims.
Right.
And that event is often described as a rebellion.
Yes.
But the truth is, it was much more than that.
Yeah, much more complex for sure.
Yeah. And then you've got the Shabano case.
Yeah.
This Muslim woman who wanted alimony after getting divorced.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court ruled in her favor, but then the government passed an ordinance overturning it because they were worried about backlash from conservative Muslims.
It's tough.
It is tough. So
Yeah.
appeasement, even if it's done in the name of secularism,
Right.
it can go against the ideas of justice and equality.
For sure. It makes you wonder, what are the consequences of putting one group's needs above the rights of individuals and the idea of fairness?
Exactly. So we've covered a lot here.
We have.
From welfare programs and how that affects the economy, to these family-run political parties, to this whole idea of appeasement and how tricky that is ethically.
It is, yeah.
All of these issues are super complex and all connected, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And they all point to something deeper about how power works in a democracy, who has it, how it's used. But like you said, while we're focusing on India today, these are really challenges for democracies everywhere.
Right. They're not unique to India.
Not at all. Every democracy struggles with this stuff.
It just looks different in each place, I guess.
Exactly. So it's good to study these issues in different places so we can, learn from each other and see what works and what doesn't.
I agree. So for our listener, as you're going about your day, I want you to think about these things. How do you see these issues playing out in your own community, in your own country? What lessons can we learn from India, from all of this? And what can we all do, to build a more just and fair world, both individually and together?
Those are great questions. And, I'd add one more thing to think about. How can we make sure our democracies stay strong and adaptable in the face of these challenges?
Yeah.
How can we protect those core values of fairness and justice and make sure everyone is represented?
That's a good one. It's easy to feel cynical about politics, especially when you see stuff like this. But we have to remember that democracies can change. They're shaped by the people in them.
Exactly.
And they have the potential to get better, to adapt.
Absolutely. It's easy to feel powerless, when you're dealing with these big issues. But every one of us has a role to play.
For sure.
Staying informed, talking to people who see things differently than you do,
Right.
holding our leaders accountable, and just voting.
All of it matters.
It all makes a difference.
One thing that makes me hopeful is how much more aware people are becoming all over the world, especially younger people. They're demanding transparency. They want their leaders to be accountable, and they want ethical leadership.
Yeah,
And that's a big deal. It's a force for change.
I agree. And technology has made a big difference, too.
Yeah.
Like with social media and all that, people are more connected than ever before, and they're more informed. So it's easier to keep an eye on what governments are doing.
Yeah.
People can get together and make their voices heard much faster, especially those who have been marginalized.
Yeah, it's like there's this global conversation happening.
Yeah.
And while it can be messy, it also shows that people are engaged, they care, and they want a better future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what democracy is all about. It's always a work in progress,
Yeah.
But at its best, it lets us course correct, it lets us change and move forward, and it's worth fighting for.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Indian politics, I hope you're leaving with more questions than answers.
I hope so.
That's what learning is all about, right? It makes you curious, it challenges your assumptions, and it keeps you exploring.
Right. And remember, these aren't just issues for India.
Yeah,
They're global challenges.
they are.
They need our attention.
Yeah.
We need to think critically about them, and we need to be active participants in solving them. So let's keep talking to each other, learn from each other, and work together to build a world where democracy can really thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And thanks to you, the listener, for joining us. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep working for a better future.
I like that.
Yeah, it is fascinating how all of this stuff we're talking about in India, it's not just limited to them. Like the whole tension between welfare and making sure the economy is doing well.
Yeah.
That's something everyone's debating globally.
It really is a global issue.
Yeah.
Finding that balance, making sure people are taken care of, but also not messing up the economy.
Right. Exactly.
And as we talked about before with India, it's even harder because of just how big and diverse the country is.
Totally. And something else that really made me think was this idea of family-run parties.
Yeah.
It seems like it's not just India, right? Like these political dynasties pop up everywhere.
You're right. It's not unique to them. You see it all over, like the Kennedys in the U.S.,
Oh, right.
the Bhuttos in Pakistan, even royal families in Europe.
Yeah.
There's just something about that family name, that legacy, that seems to appeal to voters.
It's almost like, I don't know, like a brand or something.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
But like we said before, it does raise some questions about like fairness, like is it really a meritocracy if you're just inheriting power? And what about the potential for corruption?
Yeah, those are big questions. I mean, if political power comes down to who your family is, does it really reflect what the people want?
Right, and it makes you wonder, what is it about our systems that allows these dynasties to keep going?
Exactly. Is it because we don't have term limits? Or is it something about campaign finance laws? Or maybe it's even deeper than that. Maybe it's just like a cultural thing where we defer to these families.
That's deep. Okay, let's come back to this idea of political appeasement.
Right.
This is where things get really ethically complicated, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Trying to figure out where protecting minority rights ends and using appeasement for political gain begins, that line is so blurry.
Yeah, it is.
And like we saw with the examples from India, it can have a real impact.
It can lead to resentment from other groups, make those social divisions worse, even undermine the whole idea of a just society.
That's right. And it also makes you think about what secularism really means.
Oh, how so?
Well, can a system truly be secular if it's always giving one group special treatment?
Yeah, at the expense of others.
Right. Does it just become another type of religious politics, just hiding its true intentions?
That's a good point. It makes me think about the media and what role they play in all of this.
Yeah, the media are important.
Do they have, like, a duty to call out appeasement when they see it, even if it means people accuse them of being biased? Or do they just try to keep things calm and not rock the boat?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, the media have such a big influence on how people see things.
You do.
And if they avoid these tough conversations, these problems can just get worse without anyone noticing.
And then they explode, right? Like, we've seen that with all these identity-based conflicts happening around the world.
Absolutely. We need to talk about these things openly and honestly, even if it's uncomfortable.
Right.
That's the only way to find solutions that actually work for everyone.
So we've covered a lot today. Welfare versus economics, these family-run parties, the ethics of appeasement.
Yeah.
It's clear that these are all super complex issues. They're all linked together, and they're not just happening in India.
Exactly. These are challenges for democracies everywhere. It's just that they might look different depending on where you are.
Right. And that's why it's so important to study them.
Yeah, we can all learn from each other.
Share what's worked and what hasn't. So for everyone listening, I want you to think about these things in your own life, your own community, your own country.
Yeah.
How are these things playing out where you are? What lessons can we learn from what's happening in India? And most importantly, what can we all do as individuals to build a world that's more just and fair?
Those are powerful questions. And I would add one more. How can we make sure that democracy stays strong and able to adapt to all of this? How can we protect the things that are important? Fairness, justice, making sure everyone has a voice.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's easy to just get cynical, when you look at all the problems, especially in politics. But we can't forget that democracies can change.
That's right.
They're created by the people who participate in them, and they have the power to become better.
I totally agree. It's easy to feel like, what can I do? These problems are too big.
Yeah.
But we can all do something. Stay informed, talk about these issues, especially with people who don't agree with you,
Right.
hold our leaders accountable, and vote. All of that matters.
It does. One thing that gives me hope is seeing how much more aware people are becoming, especially younger people. They're demanding transparency, they want accountability from their leaders, and they want them to be ethical. And that's a powerful force for change.
It is. And technology has helped a lot too.
Oh, yes.
Social media and all that. It's made it easier for people to connect and stay informed.
Right.
They can watch what governments are doing more closely. They can organize more quickly. And those who've been ignored or silenced can finally have their voices heard.
It's like this global conversation that's happening right now.
It is.
And sure, sometimes it's chaotic, but it also shows that people are engaged, they care, and they want a better future.
Exactly. That's what democracy is about. It's always a work in progress.
It is.
But the best thing about it is it allows us to correct course, to evolve, to make progress.
And we need to keep fighting for it.
Absolutely. So as we finish up this deep dive into the political scene in India,
Yeah.
I hope you're leaving with more questions than answers.
That's the best way to learn, right? Makes you curious, challenges what you thought you knew, and keeps you wanting to explore more.
Right. And remember, these issues we've been talking about, they're not just happening in India.
No, they're everywhere.
They're global. They need our attention. We need to think critically about them, and we need to actively participate in finding solutions. So let's keep talking to each other, learn from each other, and work together to create a world where democracy can actually thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for being here.
It's been a pleasure.
It's like, when you step back and look at it all these things, like the welfare stuff, family-run parties, the appeasement,
Right.
they all kind of come back to this idea of power.
Yeah.
Like, who's got it? How are they using it? And are they using it responsibly? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see that. It's all connected to how power works within the system.
Right. Exactly.
And it's not like these are separate issues. They all play off each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like how a country handles welfare, that can affect how the economy is doing.
Right.
Which then might make those family-run parties more appealing because they're promising easy fixes.
Yeah, exactly. And then, how the government deals with appeasement.
Yeah.
That can totally change how different groups in society interact, even affect people's individual rights.
It's like this big web, right, where everything's connected.
Exactly. It's like an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And to really get a handle on these challenges, you have to understand how it all fits together.
Yeah, you can't just treat the symptoms. You have to look deeper.
Exactly. Otherwise, the problems just keep popping up in different forms.
So where do you even start trying to untangle all of this? It's a lot, especially for people who are just starting to think about these things.
It can be overwhelming, for sure. But even small things can make a difference.
Like what?
Well, just staying informed about what's happening politically, having those tough conversations with people who disagree with you, and supporting those organizations that are fighting for transparency and accountability.
Those are good, yeah. It's about making sure we're all informed citizens.
Exactly.
And remembering that democracy isn't just something you watch from the sidelines.
Right.
We have to participate, think critically, and be willing to get involved, even when it's messy and frustrating.
It's a process, that's for sure.
But it's how we shape our future.
Exactly. And honestly, apathy is probably the worst thing for a democracy.
What do you mean?
Well, when we don't care, when we let cynicism take over,
Yeah.
we're basically giving up our power to people who might not have our best interests at heart.
That's a good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive into what's going on politically in India,
Yeah.
we want to leave you with this thought. These things we've talked about, they're not just political theories, you know. They have real-world impacts on real people.
Yeah, for sure.
And by understanding these issues, talking about them, and demanding better from our leaders, we can work together to create a world that's more just and fair.
Absolutely. For everyone and for future generations.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.
Well said.